boy, it's your boy, the Alibi Adiris of Sit Your White Ass Down. You're going to want to hear this. Jack Slack, it's the Jack Slack podcast, and we're coming at you following UFC 319. Finally a fight we all care about. Did it go the way people wanted it to? Has it been a pretty divisive result, even though it was dominant? Yes. But we'll get into that in a minute. Other fun stuff happened on the card. Double spinning back elbows, back-to-back spinning back elbow knockouts. Insane. That was like when we had two Suluev stretches. No one was it. I think we had two bulldog chokes in one night once, and two Suluev stretches in one night as well. And both of those submissions are things that you almost never see. So yeah, it was another one of those crazy nights, dangerous nights. Other fun stuff. A couple of favourites lost, which was good. Always interesting to see. And well, the fight that we all thought would be fun, Prates versus Neal, was fun. The fight that we all went, oh, that could be fun, Michael Page versus Jared Cannonier, was maybe fun. And then Tim Elliott upset Kai Asakura. It was a pretty solid night. But I'm going to start before we do anything, because you're here, you want to hear UFC stuff. But it was interesting that during the broadcast of the Jessica Andrade Lupe Godinez fight, Joe Rogan, who has been pretty unplugged from the MMA sphere for a while, took the time to say Liz Carmouche just won a belt in PFL last night at age 41. And I thought that was a really cool thing to shout out. And, you know, people then said, oh, does this legitimize PFL or whatever? No, like no amount of the UFC's action could ever legitimize PFL. They've destroyed what started. I mean, they had a lot of assets towards making a good competitor to the UFC, or at least a B League. And they seem to be, one Don Davis LinkedIn post at a time. They've undone that. But I bring it up because there was an interesting fight in PFL this weekend. I like to shout out things from around the world that you might not have seen. Alfie Davis versus Gadzi Rabadanov. Gadzi Rabadanov is a teammate of Khabib. He's 32. He's a young guy. Got Khabib in his corner. He won the last PFL tournament in this division. He was supposed to win this PFL tournament in this division. They got him a couple of UFC old-timers to style on. So he beat up Mark Jacasey in the first round, and then he got Kevin Lee coming back off of, obviously, a long time off and a lot of injuries. And he finished both of them. Alfie Davis, meanwhile, kind of an also-ran most of his career. He was a teammate of MVP at London Shoot Fighters. I think last year he switched to training with Brad Pickett over at Great Britain Top Team, or GB Top Team. And that's where Brad Pickett is training Nathaniel Wood. And Alfie Davis has had this little career resurgence. He beat Clay Collard and Brent Primus on the way to the final of this tournament. And then, you know, Brent Primus is kind of old. Clay Collard is, he's a B-tier fighter within the sort of B-tier. he's a really fun fighter, but he's not super high level. Davis was a massive underdog against Gadzi Rabadanov, and he won the decision, and he did it pretty, I'd say 3-2, fairly convincingly. There were only 3 rounds where Gadzi Rabadanov actually attempted takedowns, but if you want to see an interesting game plan for dealing with a very strong cage wrestler from Khabib's camp, who also has pretty heavy hands, Alfie Davis runs around the outside of the cage throwing southpaw left knees and southpaw up jabs, lead hand uppercuts, to either catch Rabadanov level changing or lift his head onto the left straight afterwards. Once he was on the mat, he looked a bit lost, but in the 5th round, he was actually throwing Rabadanov off when Rabadanov tried to take him down. So that was quite impressive. Rabadanov ducked in on him on the fence in the 5th round, and Davis managed to throw him headfirst into the fence, which is pretty cool. He had to break his hands apart and reposition himself. But yeah, well worth a watch if you're still wanting to watch some more fights from the weekend, or you just want to see a cage wrestler from Eastern Europe lose. If you're bitter about that main event on UFC 319, sorry. I just looked up UFC 219. Main event, Chris Cyborg versus Holly Holm. Bloody hell. And they were trying to sell that on pay-per-view. But this may well have been one of the last pay-per-views if the Paramount deal proceeds as we hope it will. So, main event, Khamzat Chimaev, Dricus du Plessis. I talked about it a lot in the week up to this. I think I did almost an hour. No, I did an hour-long podcast and I did about 40 minutes on this. But I thought it was super interesting because Dricus du Plessis is a guy who has been tested and we see all the flaws, but he still somehow keeps pulling through and beating better and better fighters. Khamzat Chimaev's a guy who obviously had tons of potential, but it's still, at this point, largely untested. You know, you've had 3 fights at middleweight. One was against a short-notice welterweight. One was against Rob Whittaker, and then one was against Dricus du Plessis. Whereas if you think of someone like Caio Borralho or Imavov, think how many top middleweights they fought on the way up. What a frame of reference we have for them. But as with all things, you gotta be able to segment your brain. You got to be able to wear your different hats, because as a fight fan, I want to see the fighters competing all the time. I'd have them out here every week if I could. But as a supporter of the fighters, you know, actually earning what they deserve from this business, you do want to see guys get as much money as possible without risking all of it all the time. You know, I'm watching Jessica Andrade on the undercard of this one. She's had 40 fights, probably like 25 in the UFC. She's been a champion, but she basically lost all her money because it was embezzled by her manager. So she fights because she has to. And shit like that is not at all uncommon. People remember when Diego Sanchez broke up with that weirdo who was coaching him, and there was he lost all his money doing that. But 5 years earlier, I think even before he fought VJ Penn, he said, "Oh, I've got to keep fighting because I had a friend who wanted to borrow $200,000 and I lent it to him and he disappeared." It's just, yeah, if I just do be doing that. So selfishly, I want to see more of Khamzat Chimaev, but I suspect even if it's been a health thing up to now, he can make the choice. There's not a lot of popular UFC champions. He's extremely popular. And, they're doing all these events in Abu Dhabi and a couple in Saudi Arabia because those places will pay them to go there. I keep seeing people go, "Oh, we've got some good British fighters. We should have gone to Liverpool. We should have gone to Manchester." It's like, those places aren't paying the UFC to go there. Why would they do that? You get one UK card a year and you get no say in where it is. So let's get into the fight. There is a lot of division on this. There are people who say that this was 5 rounds of domination. You can't ask for anything better. And there are people who say he was on top of him for 5 rounds and he did almost no damage. And he didn't look like he was trying to do damage. And both of those people are correct to a degree, or entirely, actually. I was blown away by how Khamzat Chimaev handled Dricus du Plessis. But equally, the mounted crucifix is a very strong hitting position. And at no point did he just start unloading decent elbows. He was there doing the pity-patter, knocking on wood punches on the side of the neck. Watch Matt Hughes in this position. Even fucking Valentina Shevchenko. You put your hand on their face, you frame, and then you drop your elbow down. You let your hand slip off and drop your elbow. And you can slice people up. And he didn't. He was just there patty-caking him. I appreciate that Dricus du Plessis is going to try and bridge and turn and spaz out if you keep hitting him, but it showed, like, throughout the fight, 2 whole rounds basically were spent in the mounted crucifix, and Dricus barely got out of it each time. But then we came into this fight, and I'd rewatched all of Khamzat's fights coming into this, and the thing that I couldn't understand was how people were talking about him like he was a tremendous ground and pounder, and I don't think he is. I think because he says he's going to smash people, and draws that allusion to Khabib and the similarity, he's not very good at hitting people on the ground. Even when he does, it's not super hard. He hits hard on the feet, but on the ground he tends to just sort of hold people and pity-patter them. Not like Khabib, who would stand up, give up position to rain down some hard punches and then repass your guard just because. So then the other argument there is like, oh, it's not on him to be interesting. It was Dricus who made the fight boring. There's a kernel of truth to that. There is a lot of this fight that was the fault of Dricus du Plessis, I believe. When you wrap your hands around an opponent from the bottom, you're very much limiting what you can do and what can happen because you're holding them to you. Did my head in because the first 2 double legs that Khamzat shot, Dricus wrapped his head like he was going to guillotine him. And Khamzat circled around him and landed straight into side control with his head underneath Dricus's arm, which if you maybe the first time you experience it, you'll be like, "Oh my God, I'm being choked." But I'm trying to think if I've ever seen anyone finish a guillotine from bottom side. I've seen people get back to like half guard and finish from there. But bottom side, if you're holding the head still, you are fucking up. And Dricus did try a big bridge and like turned Khamzat over the top of him. And Khamzat had to do sort of a head spin to stay on top. But that isn't a real escape. That isn't going to work, after the first round, after your first attempt when you've given yourself a hernia trying it. But yeah, Dricus kept grabbing the head. Khamzat would finish the takedown into side control, and then Dricus would have to panic and free his arms so that he didn't get Von Flue choked. This was what Ovinson Prue used to do all the time. Take people down with his head sort of low so that they'd grab his head, or just because all light heavyweights grab the head anyway, and then he'd Von Flue choke them from side control. Because once your hands are stuck under the opponent's chest, very hard to get them free. But then if you're watching Dricus on the bottom, I think there was a fight with Brunson when I first started sort of praising the weirdness of Dricus back in the day, where he gets taken down under Brunson, he's in bottom side control, and he uses the empty half guard, which is where they're across you, and you bring up the foot that's nearest to them, and you sort of back heel it over their trailing leg. And it's a weird position, which can result in some weird turnovers. Luke Stewart versus Andre Galvao. Luke Stewart, just a black belt. Andre Galvao, one of the greats in grappling, and they had an MMA fight, and Luke Stewart swept him with it. Hani Yahya is a good example of a guy who uses it in MMA. He used it when he was gassed as hell against Enrique Barzola. He had a good first round that he gassed out, and Barzola kept taking him down, so he'd used this empty half. And what will happen is the opponent will sit through. So their hips are facing you in a side control, where they're just sort of laying across you, chest on chest, and they'll sit through to free the leg into a scarf hold, which is where your hips are pointing to the same direction as the top of your opponent's head. Go look up scarf hold right now, but any sort of sit-through pin like that. People will do that when you do the empty half, and then Yahya would time them switching their hips and roll to his knees and go to the turtle, start wrestling up. Dricus in this one ended up on the bottom side, kept putting that foot in for the empty half. Khamzat would sit through, but Dricus's hands would be locked around his upper body and he'd just be stuck. Anytime you're on the bottom of side control, bottom of most pins actually, it's really important to keep your elbows in. And particularly in side control and north-south and half guard, you want your forearms in front of the opponent's chest, basically, a lot of the time. If you're in bottom side control and you reach out and you put your arms around their back and lock your hands together, you can hold their upper body to you, which kind of stops them from sitting up, which they don't really want to do anyway. But there's tons of things that can go wrong there. They're under both your elbows. They can mount you. They can start attacking arms. The thing that kept happening to Dricus in this one was he'd lock his arms around Khamzat. Khamzat would sit through to the side to a scarf hold, and then he'd put an elbow inside Dricus's locked arms and bring his knee up to that elbow so that his knee was now inside Dricus's locked arms, and then he'd push that knee to the floor and he'd have the mounted crucifix. And that played out quite a few times. There are times that you can break the rules of trying to get your forearm frames in front of the guy, but if you're trying to recompose guard or roll away from him, you need your elbows in. If your elbows are out and your arms are around the guy, you can't roll away from him, you can't roll into him. Just watch how much of this fight, when Dricus is on the bottom of side control, his forearm is behind Khamzat's head instead of in front of it. And that'll give you a clue on why it was so hard for him to do anything, even try to escape. Hit a nice ghost escape in round one, but that was about it. There are times in MMA where the rules are different to just straight grappling. So from the bottom of mount, in straight grappling, you never want to be reaching out around the guy and locking your hands around his body. In MMA, you want to do that occasionally so that he doesn't sit up and start punching you in the head. But from side control, people don't sit up to punch you in the head. Wrapping your arms around them doesn't really achieve anything in that regard. Doesn't stop them from mounting because your elbows being in is what stops them from mounting. There is an interesting variation on this. In fact, I just saw it come up on the Reddit, the BJJ subreddit yesterday. But it is an interesting idea to steal for MMA. Craig Jones, through his grappling career, when he's on the bottom of side control, he'll use the arm nearest the opponent's hips. He'll let the elbow out and reach over their back and grab inside his own thigh, so that he's locked his opponent. Well, he's locked a sort of seal around the opponent so they can't mount him and they can't walk around to north-south. And then he pendulums his legs to get his other forearm back in front of their face. Or I've even seen him pendulum people all the way over, or put his knee inside their forearm to start working back to guard. He did it to Meregali, who is a sensation in both the gi and no gi now. But Meregali and him met in the gi when they were both brown belts, I think, or maybe purple belts. And you can find that match on YouTube. But Luke Rockhold did the same thing against Paulo Costa. Paulo Costa got him down. He was absolutely gassed. He was dying of exhaustion. Luke Rockhold, this is. And Rockhold reached over Paulo Costa's incredibly big, hunky, muscular body, grabbed inside his own thigh, and Costa couldn't do anything. Couldn't really make space to land a good elbow from side control because it's hard to do from there anyway. Couldn't advance position in any way, and he just sort of got stuck holding top position. Which is not the goal, but when you're dying of exhaustion during a fight, that can be. And then the other sticking point of the fight was that position when Khamzat will be behind you along the fence as you're trying to build up. I've been saying for a while, like, people should just ignore that, move away from that, roll to your back in the middle of the cage if you need to, because it's your chances are better scrambling up from the bottom out in the open than they are when there's a fence behind you for him to pin you against. I think that the wall walking arms race has sort of plateaued at a point where the guy on the inside pushing into the cage has the big advantage. As I always say, the wall walk is so powerful that you will get back up to your feet eventually. Dricus did in this one. All of Khabib's opponents did. All of Islam Makhachev's opponents do. But it takes so long. And then when you get up, if you can't break the guy's hands apart immediately and circle off, you're just going to get taken down again because you're stuck against the fence. And it was interesting. I believe the moments that Dricus had him on his back and was away from the cage, I think Khamzat even pulled him off the cage to get on his back. He defended himself better than... Well, not defended himself better because he wasn't really having to deal with the chokes that much when he was on his knees along the fence, but he just kept trying to get up and getting put back on his hands and then kneed in the arse. But it did kind of confirm that the Robert Whittaker thing was largely due to Robert Whittaker's own dental health situation. Because I said this coming in, I watched the Kamaru fight again, and so much of that fight is Kamaru on his hands and knees, tucking his head into his shoulder, and Khamzat's going over his face with chokes, not getting anything, going over his face with chokes, not getting anything. Does it to Robert Whittaker, immediate tap, broke his teeth and all that stuff. And we all went, oh my God, he's got the power to destroy teeth. And then it became apparent that, like, he doesn't. Actually, like, that's not Khamzat being magic. That's something that was unfortunate about Rob Whittaker's health. I'm not saying he wouldn't have choked him later. I'm just saying that teeth exploding in a choke like that, not a common occurrence. As you can see in this fight, Dricus took a couple of chokes across the face and it didn't seem to bother him at all. The sole interesting moment of offense from Dricus du Plessis was when I think the fourth round? He got up and pushed Khamzat back, and Khamzat, if he takes like one attack, as he did against Usman, he'll take like a 1-2. And then he'll go, okay, my turn. And then he'll come back with his own thing. And then he'll let you have a turn and whatever. But if you throw a couple of things back to back at him, he tries to do a reactive shot, duck in and take you down. And his reactive shots aren't nearly as good as when he's driving into the fence. So it looked a bit similar to, and it happened in the fifth round too, actually, when Dricus was able to sort of sprawl on one, but just kept the leg right in front of Khamzat, didn't extend himself out, just sort of sat there. But it was similar to McGregor versus Khabib. McGregor, I don't think anyone rates him as like top takedown defense of all time, or even anything special in that regard. But the moment that Khabib started backing up with his back to the fence, or towards the fence, and then dived in on a takedown, it was nowhere near as effective, and McGregor sprawled out, got away, and it was like, oh, that was interesting. And then suddenly McGregor's back on the fence later in the round anyway. I think that was the round where he got knocked down. But a lot of strong fence wrestlers, if you put them on the back foot, it makes it very hard for them, unless they time it and they get that reactive double really well. But there was a one in the fifth round here where Dricus came in, and then he stopped short, and Khamzat like reached out, bent over at the waist, and then had to come back up to standing, and he got really out of position. If you watch the Kamaru Usman fight, he shoots some really bad takedown attempts in the third round of that one. But we talked about the good stuff from Khamzat. The takedowns were lovely as expected. Even out in the open, actually, when he's on the front foot, he does lovely takedowns. I would have liked to see more effective ground and pound. It does not seem to be his forte. But when you've got a guy pinned in mounted crucifix, come on, man. Drop some decent elbows. Do some frame elbows. The ones that everyone practices in the gym all the time. Couldn't get the submission, but... we did do the inside slip uppercut that I love. If you've never seen how he knocked out Ikram Alaskarov, it's one of the most beautiful punches I've ever seen. And he throws it from time to time because he lunges onto his lead foot every time he throws his right hand and slips to his left, which is it's taught him to get massive power on that punch, but it often means he struggles to follow up with his left hand. But when he throws his uppercut like that, it's a really weird punch, and it means he can slip inside a jab and uppercut you at the same time, which is very rare. So that's what happened on the Asakura knockout. But he also flows into takedowns nicely off it. He did it against Burns, and he did it to Dricus now. So all in all, good fight. Informative, not particularly. Impressive, yes. Fun, not super fun after sort of like the second round when you realise that Dricus doesn't have a way out of bottom because he keeps wrapping his arms around the guy. But encouraging cardio-wise from Khamzat Chimaev. I do think there's an element of not being made to work here, which I talked about extensively on the preview podcast, which is on the Patreon, should you want to check it out. But I said the problem with a lot of guys who get a reputation for fading late is that their opponents will come in with a plan to exploit that, and the plan will be make it to late. I've seen this happen loads over the years, but guys trying to take it late, but not making the other guy work. So this one, Khamzat's in top side control. I mean, maybe that's why he wasn't trying to hit him hard, because he's like, I'll save it for the next round, save it for the next round. Because he didn't really get tired in this one, and he's been breathing out his arse in his other two fights that went the distance. But Kamaru and Burns were making him work. They were, Burns was kicking him off from the guard and fighting him on the feet. Kamaru, the first round was just loaded with scrambles. It was bad for Kamaru at the start, and then it got better and better for him as the round continued. And it was like, oh, okay, well, you're making, Khamzat's trying to finish you in the first round, and now he's tiring himself out. Whereas this one, it became apparent that DDP was just like, oh, no, I can't get out from bottom position. And I think Chimaev was like, oh, I'm happy to do this for 5 rounds. So I've seen a lot of like, oh, who could even stop him? But I do think that there's a lot like, because we've not seen an awful lot of Khamzat Chimaev against good middleweights. And the middleweight division is a really strange one where everyone is not so well-rounded. Lots of specialists. Probably more rounded fighters are like Imavov, who's really mainly a striker but does use his wrestling a good bit, and Caio Borralho, who are obviously fighting each other soon to, I think, decide the number 1 contender. But Renya Derrida, completely different kind of fighter, weird-ass grappler with knees, because if you throw a knee every time that you're stepping into an exchange, bit predictable from a striking point of view, but if the guy always wants to drop on your hips, that can be a real deterrent. I mean, you just watched Alfie Davis throw up jabs and knees, and Gadzi Rabadanov stopped trying to shoot. Keeping traffic up the middle is a really important part of dissuading people from shooting. We got Fluffy Hernandez, who is a wrestler, but mainly like a cardio-heavy wrestler who comes on late. So you got to wonder, how does he, can he survive the first round, which Dricus du Plessis did. Obviously, Dricus is a big, strong freak, and he did sort of put himself in a position where he held Khamzat still. But if Hernandez can survive the first round and make lots of stuff happen, he's not the kind of guy to not make Khamzat Chimaev work. Strickland, pretty good takedown defense, weird-ass striking. All these guys are just super unique, where I feel in a lot of the lower divisions than middleweight, you get lots of well-rounded fighters, and above middleweight, it's just trash all the way down. So the answer to who could possibly beat Khamzat Chimaev, let's find out. Let's do lots of Khamzat Chimaev fights. That's what I want. That's what I was saying about Islam Makhachev. I just want to see it. Like, whenever someone says, oh, I can't see any of this top crop of contenders beating him, I want to watch that. I want to watch him beat a load of top contenders. That's what I'm here for. Co-main, Lerone Murphy versus Aaron Pico. This fight banged. I really enjoyed this, and Lerone Murphy got a chance to counter some of the boring allegations. I said coming into this one of the reasons he gets the Leon Edwards label applied to him is because both of them are very good at controlling the distance and measuring when things happen. And if they want to land one good strike and get away, they will. And if they think you're going to try and do something, they'll go, I'm not going to let you. It's the standing equivalent of smothering someone along the cage. It's making the fight not happen. And that pisses a lot of people off, even though he's clearly very talented. Aaron Pico is kind of the opposite end of that spectrum, where he's so talented and explosive and aggressive, but he puts himself in so much danger a lot of the time. So he's had loads, actually. When he loses, it's not by decision. He loses because he gets caught coming in and implodes. with the exception of the one before this, which was the loss to Jeremy Kennedy, which was a shoulder injury, which is unfortunate. Was his one of those ones where the corner tried to yank it back in between rounds? Because that was doing my head in. There was a year where everyone was trying to do that. But Pico, I talked about him in the preview. Watch his fight with Henry Corrales, the last one he had in PFL, but watch any of his fights. Backs people to the fence, smashes the body, lets them have the double collar ties, lets them hold what some people call the tie clinch with both hands behind the head, just so he can smash their body along the cage. Beautiful at framing and elbowing people off the cage. He's got a really fun boxing into sort of dirty boxing style that no one else really uses. And he's got this good box. He's got a great boxing and wrestling pedigree as an amateur. And one of his best sort of things that he does is what I call the Kronk Gym special. If you remember any of the Kronk fighters, I mean, the most famous ones are lanky boys. It's Tommy Hearns, Gerald McClellan. But the Kronk Gym guys, particularly the long ones, they were really good at throwing a long jab, long right straight, and as you throw the right straight, your right foot swings up so that it's almost level with your left foot, and then you throw that long digging left hook to the body. So not a short left hook, but a really long one. Watch any of Tommy Hearns' body shot knockouts or Gerald McClellan's body shot knockouts. I think he got Julian Jackson from one of those, didn't he? But it's a fantastic combination. And it's really important because you have to take your feet with you to do it. In MMA, there's still a lot of, I'm punching, but my back foot's still back there. To pull this off, you have to be like 1-2 and your back foot's come up and you're right on top of them. And the beautiful thing about it is that when you come in with that left hook afterwards, you can just sort of lead into them and push them into the cage, which we don't see in MMA because no one's doing this except Aaron Pico. So yeah, that was really lovely, getting to the body on Lerone Murphy. What Lerone Murphy was doing that I love, which I'm always saying people should be doing, if you're losing the boxing, this is how Jean Silva beat Kevin Vallejos. And I think everyone should be looking at it for Ilia Topuria. If you are losing the boxing, cheat. Don't make it a boxing match. Anytime he's close enough to punch you, he's close enough to elbow. He's close enough to knee. And those don't have pads on. Punching form is tricky and require, to hit hard, there's a lot of coordinating goes on. You take a joint out of that, you barely even have to move your shoulder. You're just smashing your body into them with the end of that limb. If you watch Jean Silva versus Kevin Vallejos, Vallejos is the better boxer early on. And Jean Silva starts intercepting him with elbows. And Vallejos has to go, oh, hang on, I don't like that. And he stands back a bit. And then Jean Silva starts hitting him with kicks. And then Jean Silva starts backing him up and hitting him with punches. And then Jean Silva's beating him with punches, even though Jean Silva is not the better boxer in a straight boxing contest. A similar example would be Corey Sandhagen versus Song Yudong. I would say Corey Sandhagen probably the better hands technically, but Song Yudong, he couldn't hurt him. So and Song Yudong is a massive hitter, so he's like, I can't trade punch for punch with him if he's just going to step in every time I step in. So I'm going to elbow him and at least slice him open. So in this fight, Lerone Murphy was looking to intercept him with elbows and knees every time that Pico got close. He hit him with a really nice elbow coming off the cage in like the second exchange, and I went, oh, that's interesting, because he looked a bit like a rag in the breeze. When Pico was unloading with his hands, Lerone Murphy's like, oh my God, and then he'll just pop in a little knee or an elbow after like the third or fourth punch absorbed on his guard. The clinch work was really interesting because Pico keeps taking the underhook and he does a really good job of pushing back and elbowing from there, like the one that Paul Felder knocked Charles Oliveira out with. And he does a great job with that, and he hits the body there well too. But he keeps letting his underhook drop in, the elbow come down. And Lerone Murphy was like full-on mirror-locking him. He was giving him the full John Jones shoulder crank. And you don't see that often. And then when Murphy got an underhook later, Pico tried to do it back to him. So both of them sort of dropping their elbow on the underhook and getting punished for it. But the elbow was, I think, a fantastic reaction because Aaron Pico went to do a little fake entry, which is where you step and you stop yourself. So you step in with your lead foot, stop yourself, pop off to the right, and then jump in again. Lyoto Machida was awesome at this. But Pico just a little bit slow, and Murphy read him going past his lead foot. He was like, it's going past my lead shoulder. And if you are into spinning, your key to go should be when the opponent leaves your firing line past your lead foot. Really useful one for ring cutting. If you look at like Conor McGregor, didn't have a very good right hand. Through the left hand, if you circled into it, if you circled away from it past his lead foot, it was all spinning back kicks and wheel kicks. So Pico goes past the lead foot, Lerone Murphy sees it, immediately spins, back elbows him, knocks him out. Couldn't have hoped for such a good connection, but sometimes these things just work out perfect. Poor old Pico. I mean, he was looking good, and he got starched again. And I don't think it's having a bad chin, because that was a good elbow hit him. I think it's just that he's so aggressive, and it does open him up so much. And similar, actually, I was just going to say, like, a high double forearms guard might be a good sort of band-aid, or plaster, as we call them in the UK, over that sort of vulnerability. But if you watch Jeff Neal versus Carlos Prates, a lot of what Jeff Neal was doing, because Prates was playing the matador in this one, he was out dancing and jabbing and low kicking on the back foot and running away. I was really impressed by it. And Jeff Neal decided to sort of put his forearms guard up and just sort of charge him down. And that's when he landed that sort of 5-punch flurry at the midpoint of the round. And after that, he sort of just keeps trying to come in behind his high guard, and Prates is starting to pick him off with elbows and knees, and finally spun into a back elbow that just left him on the floor. Wasn't like completely stiff. That was a good walk away knockout. Sometimes those ones bite you in the arse if you start walking away and the guy's still like moving. The ref can be. It depends how much the ref wants to see someone die, basically. But I thought Prates looked good in this one, and to stop Neal, obviously very impressive. And it was interesting because Prates has met very few notable southpaws. Dan Tom was doing a southpaw report on Twitter this week, which was really interesting, seeing how many notable southpaws each of these guys fighting a southpaw has met before. And Jeff Neal had met, I think you could count Wonder Boy, who's a switch hitter, but not really a southpaw. And aside from that, it was like Rafael dos Anjos in his last one, but that was a very early stoppage. So he doesn't have a heap of experience against southpaws, which can be indicative of something interesting, or it cannot. Because last week we all expected Steve Erceg, such a well-rounded, skilled fighter. We thought, Odie Osborne being a southpaw shouldn't be that much of a stumbling block for him. And he came out and it looked like he'd never met a southpaw in his life, like even in the gym. Every time he stepped in, he was getting banged with the counter right hook, and he's like, I don't know where he's coming from. Michael Page versus Jared Cannonier, not an awful lot to say about this one. I was really looking forward to this, and then it didn't turn out amazing. Michael Page doing a lot of the old Anderson Silva trick of showboating to cover for lack of activity. So he'd do a couple of good things, and then he'd be dancing around going, oh, he can't touch me, watching the clock tick down. Cannonier not doing a great job of cornering him until later on, did get him to the fence and start trying to take him down. One of the things about Michael Page that I do like is that when he lunges in to attack, to commit on a combination, he really goes for it. He falls into you and he puts his foot behind yours and pushes you. And the knockdown in the second round was that. He hit him twice and then he pushed him over his leg, and everyone went, oh my God, knockdown. And it reminded me of his fight with Douglas Lima. He kept trying to counter him on one leg, and he'd hit him in like the chest and run through and knock him over because he was on one leg. And they were like, well, close fight, but he did get those 3 knockdowns. And you go, wow, we're really playing fast and loose with what the term knockdown means here. Because you don't get a 10 count for it. It's not like boxing, but people will score 10-9 in favour of whoever scored one knockdown in that round. Third round. So this was all Michael Venom Page. There were some really good slips and pivots. Actually, I forgot to say that about Prates too. Lovely slips and pivots. I said that in my little study of him, Carlos Prates, the Nightmare, on the Patreon, before he fought Gary, I think it was. And I was saying I really like how he uses his shoulders to defend himself and how he pivots off behind things. And MVP was doing that well here too. It's one thing to be able to slip a punch, but to be able to slip and pivot out and actually get away from where, I've seen people slip punches and just end up stuck. If you slip a punch and you stay there and you get pushed to the fence or whatever, it's not good. He did get pushed to the fence later on. How did he get taken down? Was that an inside trip? Can't remember, but basically half guard, 2 mount over and over again for Cannonier. MVP could not get up, could not make anything happen. And it kind of reminded me of his weird fight with Douglas Lima where he got taken down and just held the wrists from the bottom of closed guard. And you're like, not really what you want to be doing, but also he's really holding those wrists and like Douglas Lima can't do anything. Tim Elliott submitted Kai Asakura, sad one for Asakura. I joked that he made Kai Asakura look like Mikuru Asakura. Mikuru Asakura is like the Japanese Jake Paul. He's famous for having a YouTube channel where he used to street fight. He's got like millions of followers on Japanese YouTube, which is also all YouTube. They count the same. But he's the more famous brother, even though he's far less talented. Kai Asakura is much better than him. But Kai Asakura is in the UFC fighting like the best guys in the world. And Mikuru Asakura is scraping wins in Rising, but they managed to get the belt on him somehow. So now he's selling out the Tokyo Dome. You're going, how long did this last? How long do we ride the Mikuru Asakura wagon? Because he fought Ren Hiromoto, who had like 4 MMA fights that he'd lost half of, and Ren Hiromoto knocked him out. And that was the biggest MMA event of the year in Japan. But yeah, Tim Elliott doing his weird shit. Kai Asakura trying to haul off and hit him with a counter knee. But how do you counter knee that which you don't even know when he's coming in? It's just sort of dancing all over the place. I mean, they've got a similar number of fights, but Tim Elliott, it looks like one of those old boxers who's just had billions of rounds. And you know that their brain is pudding, but they're just so comfortable that even if they got hit with a hard shot, you almost wouldn't believe it because they're just there going, yeah, it doesn't matter. Think of Emmanuel Augustus. Floyd Mayweather famously said, the trickiest guy to prepare for. Had 30 fights, lost half of them, ain't killed a motherfucker yet, but very weird to fight and very hard to know if you've even hit him well. So Tim Elliott, guillotine choke in the second round, mounted guillotine, always like these. It's kind of like what Sean Brady was doing. When you start guillotining someone from the top, if you can lift your belly and then put your hand through halfway and drop your belly on it, the guy on the bottom gets a little bit of squeeze where you're tight around his neck, and he starts to panic and he starts clawing for your hand, and then you really only have to like get over his other hand to lock your hands together and start applying a powerful choke. But that little like hand and belly circuit, you watch Sean Brady put that on people like Leon Edwards and they freak out. They're like, oh my God, I actually can't get to his hand to break this half choke. So Surkiev was interesting because he was fighting on like 4 days' notice. He came through the Contender Series, the first episode of the Contender Series last time. Dana White made a big deal out of only signing like one person, which he always does on the first of the season. Last season, they signed like 45 out of 48 winners, and a lot of the losers got signed on short notice fights anyway. The pretending that they have standards is the weirdest part. But Surkiev seems talented. He's 10-0 now, and he had a short notice opponent, so it was 8-3 Eric Nolan, but clearly better than his record suggested, because he gave him a bit of trouble in the early going, and then stunned him on the bell basically of the first round. And Surkiev had to sort of stop showboating for a minute to turn it around and win. Yeah, keep an eye on him. But Eric Nolan definitely deserves a fight with full prep and everything in the UFC now. Mikhail Alexijuk. When Mikhail Alexijuk is having a bad run, and they put him in against one of the worst middleweights that the UFC has, suddenly he just enters the matrix. He's phenomenal. But against everyone else, he's not very good. But he's on a 2-fight winning. Listen to the names he's beaten in the last couple of years. So he had a 3-fight losing streak, but he's beaten Gerald Meerschaert, Cedric Dumas, Cody Brundage, and Sam Alvey. 4 of the worst fighters ever in the UFC middleweight division. And then Chidi Njokwani there, who also loses a lot, but he's one of my favorites, so we don't count that. But yeah, this is him on a 2-fight winning streak for the first time since like 2020. What I like about Alexijuk is that he's a southpaw with his left hand. He knows where his bread's buttered. He comes out, fellow southpaw in Meerschaert. He starts doing the sword and shield, the cross hand trap, putting his right hand across on top of Meerschaert's right hand, and then punching the body with the left straight, like a Spartan or a Roman with the big shield and then the little pokey sword. Clubbed him over the top with a couple of left hands, knocked him down, knocked him out. Easy money. Gerald Meerschaert seems to be pretty much done now. Speaking of done, Jessica Andrade came out in the first round looking like really timid, and I thought, is she now trying to learn to box at age 33 and 40 fights into her career, or is she scared as shit? But she seemed to take some punches and then just warm up. She warmed her chin up because like the second and third round, she really gave it to Lupe Godinez. Lupe Godinez got a good takedown I think in the second, but I thought Jessica Andrade deserved this. Maybe that's just me being an old softie, but I was more impressed with her than Godinez, even though I think she's utterly washed. However, she did throw a couple of inside low kicks and come in with punches after. It's like, oh my God. For her whole career, I was going, if she had an inside low kick and came in off that, she'd have so much better success trapping people and not letting them run away. And now she's finally doing it. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was the Jessica Andrade. She's like 5'3", and her go-to defense is to pull, is to lean back. Almost everyone she fights in all weight divisions is taller than her and longer than her. It annoys me. It annoys me that her coaches haven't sorted it and they let her down. Alexander Hernandez KO'd Chase Hooper. This was a case of Chase trying to stay long and kick, and then Hernandez realizing that Hooper's kicks weren't very threatening or fast or powerful. So he was able to step up the inside of them and time them a lot. Which, if you watch his fight with Donald Cerrone, Alexander Hernandez just gets hit with intercepting knees every single time he steps in. Because he's always shorter than his opponent and he always has to sort of run to them. But Chase Hooper didn't want to throw knees. He wanted to throw these kicks, and Hernandez was able to get up the center. And then later in the first round, or at the end of the first round, Chase Hooper threw a long left straight from southpaw, and Hernandez parried and threw his right hand over the top and knocked him out. Good performance from Hernandez. I mean, Hooper's striking's been improving, but he just looked very slow here, I thought. Very unexplosive. And then the other one worth talking about, Joseph Morales versus Alibi Idris. I thought this was really fun. These guys both came in off tough. Idris was the big favorite. Hit a nice inside trip early on, and Morales worked his way up. Idris wanted to back fist all the time, and every time he did, spinning back fist, Morales would drop in and take him down very easily. There's a lovely bit of Kimura trap work in the first round. An attempted Takatine, which is a new sort of submission that's catching on. Rear naked choke with the arm in. But he did it, and he had his arm deep in the armpit, around the neck and then deep in the armpit, and he locked his hand and started choking. And then as Idris was starting to defend, he took his hand out of the armpit and wrapped the neck fully and started trying to choke him, which worked quite well. I didn't get the win though. And then in the third round, and then in the second round, he got on the back, fell off, and then just hit a pretty simple, basic overhook, knee inside on the other hand, kick your legs through triangle. What he did do on the triangle, cut the angle, turned himself around. You don't want to be both your heads pointing in the same direction. You want to cut an angle because that makes the strangle stronger, but also so that you can reach inside the leg to stop them from picking you up and slamming you, because then you get like a horrible brain injury like Japanese lad last week probably suffered in the course of getting slammed on the back of his head. If you try and triangle someone, even if you're just grappling, get in the habit of hooking the leg. Anyway, that'll do us for today. It was nice to have some big fights to be excited about, or a big fight to be excited about. Honestly, next weekend's fights, we're in Shanghai. Stupid main event. Johnny Walker main event in Big 2025. But card looks pretty passable. Brian Ortega versus Aljamain Sterling. Interesting skill matchup in the featherweight division. Sergey Pavlovich versus Waldo Cortez Acosta. That'll be frustrating. Or a big knockout, hopefully. Loney Kavanagh versus Charles Johnson for your legit talents at flyweight. Fighting for no fans. You got Rong Zhu versus Austin Hubbard. Two guys who made a career out of like kneeing people as they try and take them down. And Michelle Pereira on the curtain jerker of an event halfway around the world. Can you tell that they're annoyed with him over his repeated weight misses and losses? But yeah, I mean, that looks pretty fun actually. And we've had some PFL stuff going on. We've got we're doing the finals in all the divisions now, so stuff to catch up on the Boycast later this week for the Patreon boys. And we've got a new British heavyweight, just banged out Dillian White. I was really impressed by that. Southpaw heavyweights. Who knew? We got two now. For a long time, it was just Michael Moorer, mainly famous for his big loss. But yeah, plenty to talk about later in the week. If you want to get in on the Patreon, do support the podcast, be a boy. If not, subscribe, do all that other shit, and I'll catch you next week. I'm your boy, Jack Slack. Jared Cannonier's crystal-based striking bless.